Shabbat Shalom. This is Shabbat Tazria. Tazria is Hebrew for she conceives, because chapter 12 continues the discussion which was begun in the previous parasha, Shemini, of the laws of Tameh and Tahara, ritual impurity and purity. In chapter 13 of our parasha, we also read about Tazrat. Usually this is translated as leprosy or leprous affection. The disease called leprosy today, which is more properly called Hansen's disease, was actually unknown in biblical times, and the description given here is inconsistent with it in any case. The effects of Tazrat in human beings is a kind of scale-like eruption of the skin, but it also refers to similar outward manifestations in building materials, which we would, with the benefit of modern microbiology, know as mildew, a kind of mildew. Tazrat is viewed as a gradual erosion or disintegration leading to death, consuming the body and thus creating impurity. But it's not the disease itself, but the consequences of the disease. Kohanim were given the responsibility for diagnosing Tazrat in humans, in fabrics, and in buildings. But this was because the nature of the encampment was such that everything must be done to keep impurity away from the Mishkan. So the Kohanim were to diagnose, but they had no role in the healing process. They were simply given the specifics for diagnosis, and the specifics are very specific, as a matter of fact. They were responsible to prescribe purification and expiation for potential sufferers. It is suggested, the Midbar and also Melachim Bet and elsewhere, that Tazrat may also be a divine penalty for sin, as in the case of Miriam, and directly related to Lashon Hara, or speaking evil of others. This morning, we're going to be looking at our Torah, Haftorah, and Ketuvim B'Mashikim readings individually, but also collectively. Superficially, these readings may actually seem unrelated, but the topic that ties them together is that of purification, which is linked with Anavah, or humility. First, let's look at the Haftorah reading. This is a very interesting narrative, which I think we all remember from previous years. Naaman is a narrative that we perhaps have even heard as children, but here is some background information. The prophet Elisha was attempting to calm the king of Israel, who seems to have been having something of a panic attack. Why was the king so anxious and stressed? Because he had received a letter from another king, brought by a man called Naaman, about whom the letter had been written. Who is Naaman, and why was he so important that the king of Aram wrote personally to the king of Israel about him? Well, Naaman was a highly respected and esteemed commander of the king's army. He was a brave warrior, important to the well-being of Aram. Through Naaman, we are told that Adonai, the God of Israel, brought victory to Aram. An interesting statement. But Naaman suffered from Tazria, as I've described it. Naaman seems to have been a kind man and well-liked, even by those who served him. In fact, a young Jewish girl who had been carried away captive from Israel by Aram, now a servant to Naaman's wife, thought well enough of him to be concerned about his health. She said to her mistress, "I wish my master could go to the prophet in Shumran. He could heal his Tazria." Naaman, when he heard this, was willing to consider the possibility and to take any opportunity for healing so that he might be free from the Tazria. So he told his king about what the girl from Israel had said. And the king, who was also concerned about Naaman's well-being, perhaps for ulterior motives, but nonetheless, he did demonstrate concern. So being a king, he did what kings do. He sent a letter to his fellow king, the king of Israel, asking for his help in this matter. And Naaman, who took the message to the king of Israel, did not go empty-handed. He took with him, we're told, hundreds of pounds of silver, thousands of pieces of gold, and 10 changes of clothing, a kind of advance payment for services to be rendered, perhaps. Needless to say, Naaman's approach with his huge entourage to the king of Israel caused quite a stir in Shumran. King Jehoram was not accustomed to receiving polite notes from his fellow kings requesting personal services. The letter, which was probably quite arrogant and high-handed, asked that Jehoram personally see to Naaman's healing. For King Jehoram, this sounded very much like the king of Iran, thought that he could personally heal Naaman. Or was this a ploy to bring about a conflict between the two nations, a cause de guerre? The Jewish servant girl had said there was a prophet in Shumran who could heal Naaman, but kings only address their peers. Did either the king of Aram or Naaman understand that only the prophet in Shumran could heal Naaman? We don't know. Whether it was a misunderstanding or not, Jehoram immediately reacted. He tore his clothes, saying, "Am I God, that I'm able to kill and make alive? So he sends me a man to heal of Tazria?" You can see that he's only seeking an excuse to quarrel with me. This is obviously Jehoram's worst nightmare. The king of Aram is seeking a pretense to attack Israel, and he's sending his senior general to spy out the land. What does this tell us about King Jehoram? Well, we know, first of all, that he is the son of Achav and Isabel, that is, Ahab and Isabel and Jezebel, and that he began his reign over Israel in Shumran during the 18th year of Jehoshaphat, the king of Yehudah, and ruled for 12 years. We are told that he wasn't as evil as his father and mother. which is hardly remarkable since they seem to have been absolutely the most evil couple in Israel's history. More evil, perhaps, even than Isabel and Ferdinand of Spain, who decided on the expulsion of our people from Spain in 1492. Jehoram had removed the Baal standing stones erected by his parents. His mother, of course, was a pagan. Personally, she supported the prophets of Baal who came against Eliyahu. However, he clung to the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nevat, which had been begun when the northern kingdom of Israel separated from the southern kingdom of Yehudah after Shlomo's death. And he never turned away from these sins of idolatry and unrighteousness, worshiping other gods and rejecting God's mishpatim. Jeroboam had rebelled against Shlomo's son, taking the 10 northern tribes into apostasy and then full-blown heresy. He had pridefully created 2 golden calves for them to worship. He established his own priesthood and declared his own festivals and holy days, causing us to cease to go up to Jerusalem to worship God, because he created new cities that they could go to worship their God. Does this sound similar to some other religions, perhaps to offshoots of Judaism? Jehoram, continuing in his footsteps, was certainly out of touch with God. What is the backstory here? Because we need to know this in order to understand Jehoram. Apparently, he had no particular need for the one true God of the prophet, although he knew about Elisha. And how did he know about him? When his father died and he became king, the king of Moab took that opportunity to attack Israel. Jehoram called all Israel to fight this enemy. And he also sent word to Jehoshaphat, the king of Yehudah, asking that Yehudah join the attack. Never, of course, thinking to request the help of God. Jehoshaphat responded, also without seeking God's guidance, saying, "We are with you in this war. Think of my people and horses as your own." Jehoshaphat had asked Jehoram which route he should take. Jehoram suggested the road through the desert of their ally, Edom. The kings and armies of Israel, Yehudah, and Edom set out. But after 7 days, they found themselves without water for the army or the animals. Only then did the king of Israel think of God, demanding, "Has Adonai called these kings together only to hand them over to Moab?" Well, no, actually, he hadn't called them together at all. But Jehoshaphat said, "Isn't there a prophet of Adonai here through whom we can consult Adonai?" Have you ever done that? Gone your own way, done your own thing until there was suddenly a snag in the proceedings, and then you ask God why he wasn't making the path straight for you? Asking God to rubber stamp and implement your plans? Well, one of the servants of the king of Israel answered, "Elisha, the son of Shaphat, is here, the one who used to pour water on Eliyahu's hands," that is, the one who served Eliyahu. Jehoshaphat knew him as a prophet of God and said, "The word of Adonai is with him." Only at this point did the three kings decide to consult Elisha. Jehoram was not happy about consulting him because Elisha had not set out to impress him. Elisha said to Jehoram, "What do you and I have in common? Go consult your father's prophets and your mother's prophets." Jehoram offered an interesting response. Adonai has called these three kings together to hand them over to Moab. Which means that Jehoram had no respect for God and had no faith in God. Yet Elisha was willing to speak to God on their behalf, and not for the sake of Jehoram and Israel, but because of Jehoshaphat and Yehuda, who were righteous. And as a result, Moab's armies were defeated. Jehoram did not learn from this experience. He did not humble himself before God. He did not repent of his own sin and the sin of his people, which is why he was now in a state of panic when he received Naaman and the letter from the king of Aram. But Elisha heard of the king's behavior and his fear, because Jehoram went so far as to tear his clothing as if in mourning, which of course would be news in Shomron. Elisha sent a message to the king. "Why are you tearing your clothing? Why are you getting yourself into such a state? Just send Naaman to me, and he will find out that there is a prophet of God in Shomron." Well, Naaman came with his horses and his chariots to Elisha's house. Elisha did not meet with this pagan. Instead, he sent a messenger to tell him to go to the Jordan and dip himself 7 times, promising that his skin would be free of disease. Naaman, who was vain, arrogant, and proud, became angry that Elisha had not come to meet him personally and had not gone through some kind of magical ceremony to heal him. He pointed out that the rivers in his own country, Amanah and Parpar, and the rivers of Damasek, were far better than the water in Israel. And he left the house of Elisha in a huff and drove away in a terrible rage. Naaman had been willing to listen to the servant girl because she had shown respect by going through his wife. Perhaps Naaman believed the prophet would consider it an honor to be of service to such a great man as himself. But God hates pride. So he allowed another of Naaman's servants to speak to him once again, this time to ask him humbly to what lengths Naaman would be willing to go to be rid of this skin disease. Surely dipping himself 7 times in the Jordan was nothing. So Naaman went to the Jordan, did as he was commanded, although he may have felt ridiculous and probably was still angry, and he was healed. But note here the huge difference between Naaman and King Jehoram. Unlike Jehoram, Naaman with his whole retinue returned to Elisha, stood before him, and admitted, "There is no God in the earth except the God of Israel." He offered Elisha a gift for his services. But of course, Elisha was not serving Naaman. He was a servant of God. No tip was in order. But Naaman was serious, and he was anxious for Elisha to understand that this was merely a token of his respect, his reverence for the God of Israel. His words are profound. Listen to these. "From now on, your servant will offer neither burnt offerings nor sacrifices to other gods, but only to Adonai. Accept this, and may Adonai forgive your servant for it. When my master goes into the temple of Rimmon to worship there, and he leans on my hand, and I bow down in the temple of Rimmon, when I bow down, may Adonai forgive your servant for this." Elisha told him to go in shalom, in wholeness and peace, having demonstrated his fear of the God of Israel. In both situations, Adonai demonstrated his awesome power. God rescued the armies and kings of 3 nations for the sake of Yehudah. But Jehoram did not acknowledge God nor honor him. God rescued a pagan who had no reason to understand the nature of the God of Israel. But this man came to God in humility and found peace for his soul. How does this narrative relate to our other readings? What does this lesson in purification, obedience, and humility have to do with our Torah and Ketuvim B'Mishakim portions? The 8th day, the day of purification for the new mother, the day of the Brit Milah for her son, is the first day of new creation. In Bereshit, 7 days are the days of creation and completion. Here there are 7 days of impurity, followed by an 8th day, which denotes a new beginning, as Naaman was told to dip 7 times. Circumcision, an act of humility and purification, was given originally to Abraham to distinguish his household from all other people groups. This is what we read. "As for you, you and your children to come throughout the ages shall keep my covenant. Such shall be the covenant between me and you and your children to follow, which you shall keep. Every male among you shall be circumcised. You shall be circumcised in the flesh of your foreskin, and that shall be the sign of the covenant between me and you. And throughout the generations, every male among you shall be circumcised at the age of 8 days." We're also told that those who were not circumcised were considered not to be part of Israel. So circumcision on the 8th day is the boundary distinguishing the family of Abraham, joined to Adonai through covenant, from everyone else. As a sign of the significance of this act, circumcision is required by God of all males who desire to keep Pesach. The 8th day is significant because the newborn has completed a 7-day unit of time corresponding to the process of creation and completion. Similarly, Shemot 22 29 stipulates that the firstborn of animals is to be dedicated on the 8th day after birth. And Vayikra 22:27 explains that an animal is not fit for sacrifice before the 8th day. Our readings address a requirement for redemption of the firstborn. This is called Pidyon Haben, which is given in Shemot 13 and also relates to Pesach. Adonai said to Moshe, "Set aside for me all the firstborn, whatever is first from the womb among the people of Israel, both of humans and of animals, belongs to me." God commanded that when we came into the land that he had promised us, every firstborn male should be consecrated unto him and must be redeemed. All firstborn sons must be redeemed. When a son asked his parents why this is done, they must tell him that it is because God brought us out of Egypt and slavery. When Pharaoh was unwilling to let us go, Adonai took the life of all the firstborn males in the land of Egypt, both of humans and of animals. This is why a sacrifice was made to Adonai for any male that is first from the womb of any animal, and why all firstborn sons must be redeemed. A high price was paid by Egypt for Pharaoh's stubbornness and pride. We are not to take our firstborn sons lightly. Adonai tells us that they belong to him and that we must redeem them. The Shulchan Aruch of the Code of Jewish Law tells us that redemption of a woman's firstborn son is the duty of every Jew. If a firstborn son is not redeemed by his parents, he is responsible to redeem himself when he is old enough. Redemption is accomplished through a Cohen, that is, through someone who is supposed to be of the tribe of Levi, descended from Aharon or his representative, by giving the equivalent monetary value. Payment is made to a Cohen because it would seem that God intended every firstborn male to serve him, but because of the golden calf, he chose the tribe of Levi instead. Leviim are substituted for the firstborn. The firstborn son is to be redeemed when he is 30 days old and not before, although the redemption may take place shortly after. We fulfill this obligation by making an appropriate gift to our Kehillah, as we do with our tithes and offerings. Pidyon Haben is a beautiful ceremony, not only recognizing the biblical requirement, as did Yeshua's parents, but as a reminder of what happened to the Egyptian firstborn sons, which freed us to worship God. This passage is also about purification of a mother after a birth, as we see in the Parashah and in the Ketuvim B'Mishakim. On the 8th day, when it was time for Miriam's son's Brit Milah, he was given the name Yeshua, a name for Yahashua, which was used in the first century, which is what the angel had told Miriam before his conception. Pardon me. Sometime after Miriam's purification, she and Yosef took Yeshua to Jerusalem to present him to God according to the Torah commandment. Miriam had given birth to the Mashiach, yet in complete humility and obedience, they went before God to fulfill the commandments. Like other firstborn sons, Yeshua was redeemed, and Miriam, by her offering, made the statement regarding her need to be purified. She and Yosef began Yeshua's life with obedience and humility, following the express commandments of God. Rav Yeshua told a parable of the talents, noting that if one was humble and faithful in small tasks, he or she would be trusted with greater responsibilities. Our purpose in this life is to use what God has given us to serve Him in obedience. We are accountable to God and to one another for the life that we lead here. People often say they want to do great things for God, but this is pride. We must be willing to show ourselves obedient, faithful, and humble. If we humble ourselves before God, He will raise us up. Mashiach Yeshua, whose earthly life is a paradigm, an example for us to follow, humbled Himself, although He was God, in order to die as a sacrificial atonement for our sins. A life lived in humility and obedience. This is what pleases God. Shabbat Shalom.